Good afternoon or evening to you on the internet, wherever you are. You know what time it is. My name is Mark Evanier, and every Tuesday night I come on here and I have a conversation with an old friend of mine or a new friend of mine, and we let you listen in. I have been fortunate enough to meet an awful lot of fascinating people in my life, many of them very funny. I don't know of anybody I know who is funnier than this man. I saw him at the Comedy Store when not many people knew how funny he was, and I saw as more and more people knew how funny he was. And you're going to get a chance to spend the next hour or two, however long we can keep him here, with my friend Mr. Jeff Altman. Hello, Jeff.
Hey, Mark.
Thank you for doing this. Thank you very
My,
much.
my very great pleasure.
We haven't seen each other in a long time.
You sure haven't. But you
We
look the same.
Well, you look way more like you did then than I do like I did then, I think. But
Well, I don't know.
you look happy. You look rested and ready. We both saw each other under periods of great stress at times,
Yes, we did.
and we went through. You go through certain shows that will put you through night and day and stress and networks and yelling and people losing their cool and things like that, and you somehow bond sometimes with those people. I made some terrific friends when we did that show with those two Asian ladies,
All right.
and uh, I still have friends from that era, and we felt closer than if we'd worked on a huge hit, I think, because we went through all that. And I treasure certain experiences that way. And I just got to see you at your best at times there, because nobody could be at their best through all that stuff. I thought it was amazing how much you put up with. Um,
Well, you
some
had
of
to
the
put up with me.
well, the problem with there were about 53 problems with that show before we even taped the first one. It was, it was a stupid deal that someone at NBC made to try and cash in on these girls and their international success. Somebody at RCA Records said, if we can make them stars, we can own a piece of this act. If we can make them stars in this country. So they made this deal. The Crofts, Sid and Marty Croft, had a deal that guaranteed them 6 hours of something in prime time. NBC had to buy 6 hours of something. And we went through, before they got to Pink Lady, we went through all these other stars. Well, we'll do the 6 hours with Roy Clark. It was going to be a Roy Clark show one day, and
Really?
then it was going to be a Village People show, and it was going to be a Barry Manilow show, and it was going to be we went through all these different, and finally one day they said, okay, we're buying 6 hours of Pink Lady, and I was the only person at the Crofts who knew who they were, uh, and I was already signed to whatever the show was. I had already had a deal to be the head writer on whatever the
Right.
program was, and uh, it just from it. You have. I've heard people work on a show and they say, "Here's where it went wrong." Ours went wrong day one when they decided to do it. That was the. It was. Uh, we could not get, even before we were on the air, even for anybody that's seen the show, we couldn't get guest stars. You remember how we were running around begging for guest stars and that thing? Nobody wanted to be on the show with
Right.
me.
I remember that.
We had Tony Randall agreed to do the show. His manager said, okay, Tony will do the show. And then Tony called up our line producer, was a lovely lady named Bonnie Dorr, who you remember well, and
Yes.
said, these girls, these Pink Lady girls from Japan, now they're big fans of Tony, right? And she had to say, well, no, they've never heard of him. They'd never heard of any of our guest stars. We had Jerry Lewis on. They'd never heard of Jerry Lewis. We had Larry Hagman on. They'd never heard of Larry Hagman.
No.
They didn't
Nope.
know who anybody was.
Nothing.
And um, so anyway, so the manager calls back and says, Tony doesn't want to do the show if the stars haven't heard of him. And he was gone. We never got Tony Randall. It was,
Jeez.
we went through things like that a lot. And the saving grace was that we got some very funny people on the show, starting with you and a couple of supporting players. And we did a few sketches I was really happy with here and there. And we put up with, this death time slot they put us in. There had never been, and still to this day has never been, a successful variety show at 9 p.m. at night.
Is that what time we were on?
We were on 9 p.m. Friday nights. Name me another successful 9 p.m. variety show.
Zotes. Nothing.
Nothing. And we were on Friday night on NBC, which was a dead night for them. It was a show that they were.
You remember what happened? You remember what happened, Mark, on the very first show?
I remember everything.
Do you remember who we were up against?
We were up against Dukes of Hazzard.
And do you remember who guest starred on that particular episode?
Was it you?
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
They ran me against me.
Yes. That's right.
I don't know what theory that was, but
do you remember what our lead out was? The show after us was?
No.
The Best of Saturday Night Live, the absolute cheapest show in the history of the network. They reran sketches that had already been run 20 times that they owned and didn't have to pay anything for. It was a free show for them. They didn't weren't even paying residuals to the actors on it. And we were, and our lead-in was Here's Boomer with the little dog that guested briefly with us.
Handling that.
Yeah. But let's talk. Let's save some of that. I first saw you at the Comedy Store. What year did you start playing the Comedy Store?
1974.
I probably saw you the first year.
I was
and tell people some of the people who were on the bill with you then. Who else was on at the store in 74 playing up on stage?
Well, you had George Miller.
George Wonderful.
You had David Letterman.
I remember Letterman. Oh, did you do what I asked you to do with Dave? Remember you told me you were going to go spend some time with him? And I asked.
I couldn't do it.
Oh, I asked you
my wife had an operation on her hand, and I couldn't go to Montana.
Okay. Well, I asked Jeff, while you're staying with him, could you sneak into his room at night and shave him for us, please? You could it's a little thing. We would really appreciate it. Yeah. But he had a beard when I first saw him at the store. He had like a reddish beard.
That's right.
He was the MC.
That's right.
I think he was alternating with Argus Hamilton or someone like that at that point. And who else was there? Who else was on the bill with you?
Oh gosh, Johnny Witherspoon, bless his heart, and Dave Tyree, maybe. I don't know if that name rings a bell.
I remember the name briefly.
Who else? You tell me, Mark.
Was Lenny Schultz there then?
No, Lenny came a little bit later.
Okay.
By the way, one of the funniest people in the United States was Lenny Schultz.
Did you ever have to follow him on stage?
I don't know if I ever had to follow him, but one of the things that irked most comedians was having to follow Lenny Schultz, because he would come out and he would finish his act all virtually naked by smashing a Van de Kamp's pie into his face. And so they had to clean, the fire department had to come in and, sweep off the stage just about when he left. So
I remember the bit he used to do with yogurt. He would smear his body strip down to his shorts and smear his body with this big tub of yogurt. Yeah, and it'd be dripping all over. And then he'd leave the stage, and whoever the MC was would, get up there and try to not slip in it.
That's
and
right.
Go, ladies and gentlemen, Richard Pryor, or whoever it was, had to follow him.
I think Billy Crystal was on Letterman one night, and Dave asked him who would be the person you'd want to follow least, and he said Lenny Schultz.
Yeah. Well, I remember, let's see, when I would go up there, I'd see Mitchell Walters.
Yeah, I spoke to him the other night.
Really?
Yeah.
Is he still performing, or is he?
Yeah, I don't know if he's still, nobody's performing now.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Right. But he's in the fine settle, and we spoke for maybe half an hour.
Oh, good. I remember Joey Kamen. Remember Steve Landisberg. I think he came a little later.
No, he was there when I arrived.
Okay.
He was already on the West Coast.
And
Leno was there.
Leno, yeah.
1975, I think he showed up.
Yeah.
And just a bevy of really funny people.
Willie Tyler and Lester.
Yes.
Not many women. Not very many women.
Comic.
Oh, what?
I said, we're playing Guess the Comic.
Oh, that's right. uh, uh, anyway, I just was real impressed when I saw you the first
Well,
time there,
thank you.
because I said to myself, this guy has all the equipment. I mean, there are a lot of guys who could just stand on stage and talk funny, which you can do, but he could do voices, he could do impressions, he can do physical comedy. You moved funny. I remember you were doing I remember may remember your old act better than you do. I
Yeah.
remember you were doing Raymond Burr
Yes.
on Ironsides, and you were doing Mr. Carson. You were
Yeah.
doing Johnny a lot.
Little
What?
Johnny.
Yeah. What was the story where Johnny came on stage there with you one time?
Well, one night, Buddy Rich who actually happened to wind up being a very close friend of mine. But Buddy Rich, the greatest drummer that ever lived, was playing at the Comedy Store with his band in the main room. And I was in the original room, and I was on stage doing Johnny. And somebody said to him, hey, there's a comic on stage doing you in there. So he came into the back of the room, and there I am up on stage. And he kind of sidled his way up to the front of the side of the stage, and I'm standing there going, that's great. Doc is not here tonight. Ed is not here. Who's here tonight? And I hear this voice go, geez, I don't think you're doing that just right. And it was Johnny standing 5 feet off the stage.
Wow. Do you remember you and me playing on his set? Do you remember when we went over to his stage at NBC?
Yeah.
Do you remember this? I mean, do you remember this at all?
Kind of.
We were doing the pilot for the Pink Lady show,
Right.
and we were doing it in stage 3. He was on stage 1,
Right.
and you were in a suit and tie for the next bit, and we had like half an hour or 45 minutes before they were going to get to it, because the cheerful, lovely Mr. Art Fisher was taking his time doing the number from among the many ways you and I bonded was that the director of the show hated both of us. So it was, and we walked over to Carson's set. This is like at 10:30 in the morning. It was deserted. There was a drape over Johnny's desk. And
Right.
I went into the audience, and you stood on his star and did a thoroughly filthy Johnny Carson monologue. And I was yelling hi-yo. And then you went over to the desk and you pulled the drape off it. And I'm thinking, oh,
No,
we're going to get, yes, you did. You thought, you said, you pulled the drape off, you slid it off and sat behind his chair. You did that. I was a witness to this. And I went down and sat in the guest chair for a few minutes, and we started talking like we were on the show. And then Barbie Benton walked in. Now, you must remember Barbie Benton in the see-through blouse.
Absolutely. I remember Barbie Benton because the first time I was ever on television in 1975 on the Merv Griffin show, she was a guest with Hugh Hefner.
Okay. Well, she was the musical guest that night on The Tonight Show, which was being hosted that night by Richard Dawson. Carson was away.
Right.
And she walked in and she caught us playing on the set. And we got out of there as fast as we could. So we're walking out of Carson's studio, and you're still doing Johnny. And you're doing, is Doc here? Is Doc not here? Yeah. And you said, Doc's not here. He's having sex with a Clydesdale. And we turned the corner, and there's Doc Severinsen standing there.
Oh my God!
You don't remember this? You did a whoa.
Yeah,
and he looked at you and he said, "Hey, that horse was the best fuck I ever had."
Really?
Yes. Why don't you remember this?
I don't remember it as clearly as you do. I certainly would have remembered ripping the cloth off Johnny's desk.
Well, I saw it. I swear you did that, and we got out of there. Like we're like Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer playing where we're not supposed to be, and then we went back and did our show, and it was NBC is not like that anymore. There's no studio like that anymore where you can just go around and I used to hang out at NBC. I used to just sneak in there and watch Carson tape and watch Laugh-In and watch Bob Hope. And I went to 3 rehearsals of the Dean Martin show. So I was there 3 more times than Dean was. And anyway, but anyway, you were doing on back at the Comedy Store. You were doing Carson. You were doing Nixon. You did a great Nixon.
Mhm.
You did, and you were doing Leonard Moon, and you were doing all these other characters. And I just thought you were one of the funniest guys I ever saw.
Well,
And
thank
then a couple years later, I was doing a pilot for the Crofts with Anson Williams.
That's right.
Okay, and we wanted you to be like the comedy backup player, and you
Right.
weren't available because you were doing a pilot for somebody else at that time.
Right.
So we hired Kirkenbauer, Bill Kirkenbauer,
Oh, my good buddy.
and then yeah, my good buddy too, yeah. And 2 days before we taped, um, NBC pulled Kirkenbauer off to star in another pilot. They said we need him for this other project, and Fred Silverman calls Marty Krofft and says, he's only a backup player on your show. We need him on this other pilot to save it. So he leaves us, and we've got, day before tape, the show's all written. We're already halfway through rehearsals, and we have this hole now. And Bonnie Dorr, who was running it again, she calls her next choice. He's not available. Her next choice, she's not available. Her next choice, she's not available. And she calls me up and she says, we're in trouble because I'm down to my fifth or sixth choice. And I said, well, remember, Kirkenbauer was our second choice. Why don't you see if Jeff Altman's available? He was our first choice. And she goes, oh, you're right. Oh, my God. So she calls, and you had been released from your pilot deal that morning. This is the way it was told to me.
Yeah, they got to look at my acting, Mark, and got out of the contract.
No, your pilot didn't get picked up. You were doing a pilot for something else.
Yeah.
Was that with Diane Stillwell, or was that another thing?
No, that wasn't me.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, you were doing a pilot
Yeah.
for another show at NBC, and they dropped it. They dropped that pilot.
Yeah.
So you came into ours, and you had one day, and your manager got you way more money than the Crofts wanted to pay, but
Is that right?
desperate. Yeah, you got like, they weren't happy with how much they had to pay. They were happy to have somebody. They were happy to have somebody good. And you and I remember, I came in to meet you formally, and Bonnie introduced us, and I started telling you how good I thought you were. And Bonnie said, why don't you two go have lunch and get acquainted? So we walked across the street to the Denny's across from KTLA. We sat there eating lunch, and
I remember that.
Yeah. And you turned to me and you said, I think you're one of the funniest comedians I've ever seen. And you said, oh, yeah, tell me another person you think is a funny comedian. And I thought to myself, I will never be friends with this man if I say the wrong name. So I said, well, Tim Thomerson. You said, fine, that's good. You like Tim. I appreciate that.
Tim, was, in my estimation, one of the best that ever was, if not the best that ever was. When he was all fired up on all cylinders, he was tough to beat. He was very hard to follow.
Yeah, well, he was great. I don't know if I ever told you this story, but I did a show one time, and they asked me to recommend a comedian for a spot, and I said, and I mentioned Tim Thomerson. Get Tim Thomerson. He's wonderful. So the producer calls me up later and says, we brought your friend in, and he was lousy. He just thought we didn't even like him. I said, gee, he's one of the funniest comedians I've ever seen. And he said, no, he just had nothing. And he starts telling me about the guy with the act the guy did. And I went, wait a minute, who did you bring in? He said, the guy you mentioned, Skip Stevenson. I said, no, you had the wrong person. Anyway, and we did that show, and the only thing anybody at the network liked about it was you.
Well, thank you.
And Anson and his then wife, who starred in it, got divorced afterwards. So
is that right? I remember walking across the studio at Paramount one day. I think it was Paramount, and I was very slowly, and I see this situation now happening in slow motion. I was approaching Anson Williams, and he turned to his manager, I suspect, and said, who is that? He went, Jeff Altman. And so he greeted me as if we were old friends, but I'll never forget that.
Oh, Anson's a nice guy. I don't know if he just couldn't remember you that moment. But no, you were the best thing on that show by far. And you picked up on it so class with material that had not been written with you in mind. You and I got together and adjusted a lot of it.
Yeah.
And it actually came out like a pretty decent pilot. And remember who we had as guest stars on that show?
No, I don't. Do you remember?
Yes, I remember everything. We had Ron Howard, Al Molinaro, Eddie Ron Howard was a guest on the show, the pilot.
Wow.
Al Molinaro from Happy Days also.
That rings a bell.
Eddie Rabbitt, the singer, country singer, Western singer,
Yeah.
Eddie Rabbitt, and
Yeah.
Gary Coleman.
No kidding.
Gary Coleman was on that show. He played your son in a sketch.
Seriously?
Yes. I can send you a DVD of it. I've got the only copy in existence, I suspect.
Yeah, I won't be needing that, Mark.
Anyway, now by this point, were you working the Improv a lot at this point, or just the store? Or
occasionally, in those days, if you were a Comedy Store person, you kind of stayed around Sunset Boulevard, and if you were an Improv person, you just kind of stayed on Melrose Avenue. And there was only a few guys that made the switch back and forth and back and forth. Robin was one.
Leno would work them both. The same night, he'd go back and forth between them.
Yeah.
Remember, yeah.
He just doesn't work enough, He still works 300 nights a year.
Well, some people, listen, I respect the hard work. I never saw a guy work harder than that man.
Without question. I had a friend. Do you remember the guy that used to stand at the door at the Comedy Store named Harris Pete?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Heavy set guy. And anyway, he went and actually saw Jay not too long ago, about a year and a half ago. And Jay did right under 2 hours and had to do a second show that night.
He was.
Take your hat off to him.
He on Sundays he goes down to the Comedy Magic Club in Hermosa Beach with my pal Jimmy Brogan.
That's right.
And they do a really good show for like $25 cover. It's the same show he does in Vegas for $100 a ticket. You get it at the Comedy Magic Club, and you get to sit closer for $25 or it's $30, whatever it is. And it's a great show. I mean, it's and the guy just does joke. He's like a machine up there, and it's amazing. He keeps doing it all these years. He seems to not get tired of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, fine. But I remember you were up at the store. I remember you in the big room a couple of times. We were hanging out there. Now, do you remember one time? You're about to go on,
right?
And they came up to you and they said, Jeff, there's another comedian just dropped in, and he's going to go on before you. A surprise drop in, and you were a little pissed because you wanted to do your act and get out of there. And you said, "Who is it?" And they said, "Yakov Smirnoff."
Yeah,
you were annoyed at that. It's like it's one thing to be bumped, and another to be bumped for Yakov Smirnoff. So you said to me, "Have you got a watch on?" I go, "Yeah, I had my watch on." He says, "I got a second hand on it?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I want you to time me. Stop me if this sounds familiar to you."
No,
you
I remember
finish the story.
Yes,
okay. And you said, "I'm going to go out there, and in the first 5 minutes, I'm going to get more laughs than him without saying a damn thing." So I stood by the stage. You came out and started doing, without saying a word, you were doing funny body language and dancing and funny faces, and you were doing that thing you did where you made your body look like a gym coach. You were so rubber, yeah, and you were staring at the audience, and they were hysterical. I have never laughed harder than 5 minutes of no material, and at the end of the 5 minutes, I go, "Time," and you turned to just became a human being, and you said, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jeff Altman from Syracuse, New York," and the place just exploded.
Really?
And I thought to myself, there's not a single other comic who's worked this club who could do that.
Well, thank you.
Name me another guy who could do physical stuff like that. There's lots of guys who could stand there and tell funny stories.
Well, Robin did a good job, and Tim Thomerson did a good job.
Okay, all right.
But
but they had to talk to do it. They had to speak. You were doing mime, and no, I just thought that was like one of those.
It was a great night. It was a great night at the store. There were many of them, weren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. There were just terrific evenings, and you'd go there and you'd go away and you'd say, you remember a name of somebody, you say, I'm going to see that guy again. That guy is going to be, and I remember seeing Sam Kinison when he was starting out there.
Yes.
And nobody knew who he was. And I remember seeing Dennis Wolfberg when he was starting out.
At the Comedy Store, Dennis Wolfberg?
I think I saw him at the Improv, actually.
Yeah, probably the Improv.
Yeah, at the Improv. But I remember these guys, seeing them. I was there the first night at the Improv. I have a joke that I've used a couple times. I will say, that was the biggest waste of time in my life since the evening I spent at the Improv hitting on Ellen DeGeneres.
Oh,
and I was there the night she did her set that she was doing the next night on Carson.
Right.
And I was
first Carson.
What? Pardon? What?
I think it was her first Carson.
Yeah, her first Carson. Her managers had hired a comedy writer friend of mine named Gary Belkin to like critique her and give advice. And I had dinner with Gary at that restaurant across the street. Gary was one of the co-owners of the Improv. And we had dinner and we walked across the street and he said, I want you to watch this lady with me. And I thought she was very funny that night. And we sat with her in the bar and he essentially said to her, okay, now I'm going to give you notes. Do it exactly the same way tomorrow night. I'm done. That was the notes he gave her because her set was so strong.
Whose notes were those?
This is this comedy writer, Gary Belkin.
Okay.
Gary Belkin was one of the Sid Caesar's old writers. He was a friend of mine who wrote lots of writers. He wrote for the Carol Burnett Show, and wonderfully funny man. And he was like an advisor. They'd hire him to goof up comics acts and things like that.
Yeah.
And I saw Ellen DeGeneres the night before she did Carson, and I saw Kirkenbauer. Kirkenbauer is another guy who could do funny stuff.
Bill had a lot of equipment as well. He a lot of tenacity and kept going. If the crowd wasn't laughing, he'd get them.
Yeah, I saw him in Vegas a couple of times. I go to Vegas and hang out with him and stuff like that. And he just killed the place. He was so damn funny, and nobody could pronounce his name. We'd walk through the casino and people go, "Hey, you're the guy. You're the guy there." They didn't know him. But you and I hung out in Vegas a couple of times.
That's right.
You remember you were opening for Kool and the Gang at Caesar's Palace.
That's right.
And this is another time I was really impressed. We went there, and Kool and the Gang had a 40-piece company. They had 40 people in their company. They had music people, they had sound people, they had lighting people, they had costumes, they had dancers, they had 2 moving vans parked behind. Full show, and the show wasn't that wonderful. And I remember you were opening for them, and you changed your shirt. That's all you did. You had no props, you had no equipment. You just changed your shirt, walked out on stage, and killed for half an hour.
Wow.
And I thought to myself, it's like magic, which you're very adept at. There are guys who have big box tricks, and they spend their lives having to ship their boxes, their huge boxes that they vanish people in to places, and they have to repair them and repaint them and fix them and things like that. And their whole life involved is in the equipment. And then there's guys who can just have a deck of cards, and they can, like Ricky Jay. You give Ricky Jay a deck of cards, and he could do 90 minutes for you easily, and you'd love every minute of it.
Ricky was a very dear friend of mine, and was considered perhaps the maestro of my generation as far as cards were concerned. And he could throw cards, Mark. I don't know if you know that.
Yeah.
He could throw.
Oh, yeah. I saw him.
He had the world record for throwing cards further than anyone else. One night he threw a card over the Magic Castle.
Wow, he was amazing, and I got to talk to him a few times. Now, tell people about your magic background.
Well, my background was that my father was one of the best sleight of hand artists in the United States, and he, as I got older, I started, watching him and observing and learning kind of just by watching how to handle a deck of cards, not to do any tricks because I didn't know moves or sleights and then by the time I was about 16, he started to teach me some things. And then when I graduated from high school the next year, I got down to Baltimore, Maryland, where I went to school, and I met, I would say, 3 people who were very influential in molding my card magic career. And
who were they?
A guy named Howie Schwartzman, a guy named Frank Thompson, and another guy named Cy Keller. And they were tremendous.
I've heard all those names. Yeah.
Yeah, they're great, really great people.
Who were your heroes in magic? What were the guys you really admired?
My father, Di Vernon, who I know you've heard of.
I worked with Di a bit. I hung out with Di at the castle for many times.
Is that right?
Amazingly. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, we had him actually when I was doing That's Incredible. We had him on the show. We brought him in to.
You know, that's my best impression now. Is Vernon?
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hey, come over here, Mark. I want to introduce you to some of my friends.
That's him. Yeah. He was the greatest thing about being a member of the castle when I grew up.
He was in, for those who are listening, or even not, you can tell your friends. He was the greatest sleight of hand artist of the 20th century.
Yeah.
So
okay. Who else did you admire?
Well, my dad, as I said, my uncle did magic. Al Altman, which is another interesting story, and the 3 people I mentioned from Baltimore, and more recently, when I went out to the Magic Castle, I met a fellow named Steve Freeman, and Steve was along with Ricky Jay, I think the best of my generation with cards. And we became very, very close friends. And then another fellow came out from New York City named David Roth. And David, I got David on the Tonight, not the Tonight Show. I got him on with Letterman on Dave's show. And he was the best in the world at the time with coins.
Really? Did you ever know a guy named Don Allen? Remember Don Allen?
Yeah.
He was the guy who really inspired me when I was doing magic at a lower level than you were, but there were a couple of guys I got to hang out with them at the store. I actually, who I met at the Comedy Store one night? Kuda Bux.
You met Kuda Bux?
Kuda Bux, yes.
Wow.
Kuda Bux. I booked him on That's Incredible. So when I was doing That's Incredible, I would find magicians at the store and put them on That's Incredible. I put Richard Turner on TV for the first time.
No kidding.
And Kuda Bux came down. I was at the Comedy Store one night.
It's funny.
Excuse me, at the Magic Castle. I'm sorry.
It's funny that you mentioned both those people because both of them made a career out of not being able to see.
Yes, that's right. Yes. Kuda Bux was the man with X-ray eyes. He did this act. He was retired, and he had been a fixture of early television. He was on TV in the 50s. He had a local show in Los Angeles where he would do tricks, and people would come down. They spend 20 minutes putting dough over his eyes and coins and wrapping his head up, and then he'd drive a car or whatever. I was at the Magic Castle one night. I took a friend of mine, a lady who was staying with me. Her name was Sherry Flanagan. She was editor of the National Lampoon and one of their cartoonists. And I took her to the castle that night, and we saw like everybody that was there. And then as we're leaving, one of the hosts says, "Oh, you're going to leave before Kuda Bux?" And I said, "Kuda Bux? Kuda Bux is here?" So yeah, he's doing a special 10 p.m. show for magicians only in the Parlor Prestidigitation, one of the showrooms there. And they got me into it. I begged Sherry, please, I know you're tired. You want to go home. Please, can we stay with us? She said, okay. Yeah. So we stayed, and Kuda Bux came and he did his whole act. He hadn't done it anywhere in like 5 years or 10 years. And at the end of it, I went up to him and I said, "When was the last time you did that on television?" It was about 15 years ago. I said, "Would you want to do it on ABC on the number 8 show in the country next week?" And he said, "Great. Yes, I'd love to do that." So he gave me his contact info, and I went in the next day and I told the producers, we're putting him on the air, and they said, fine. And 3 days later, he died. Yeah, he died. He died before we could get him on.
This must have been around
81 or so. Yeah.
Something like that after our show. It was after our show.
Yeah. And so, Well, anyway,
I didn't refer to that show as our show.
well, it was our it was nobody's show. It was our show. It was nobody's show. We should talk more about it. What do you remember? What do you remember as happy moments from that show?
One of the proudest memories I have was there was a sketch with the two girls, Sid Caesar and the two girls had a were having a apparently, I guess, with one, he was trying to date one of the girls or something, and they had a tiff, and they went into some room and they were fighting, and we carried him out of the room, and there was a line that had been written probably by Biff Maynard, but it wasn't funny, and
and then that was definitely Biff. Okay, yes.
Okay, and I suggested to him a line that I heard in 8th grade, and I said, why don't you just say, Sid, that, oh my God, they slapped me sleepy. And he said it. I couldn't believe he said it. Oh my God, they slapped me sleepy. And so I put words into his mouth. And for me, that was, I felt right up there with Woody Allen.
Yeah, well, that's great. Sid was very odd, very strange man.
He was a character, but he was great. Never hated to rehearse.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. He was the problem. You never knew where you stood with him. He'd give you strange looks. You'd say something nice to him. He's looking at you like, what do you really mean by that? And I just, I was very proud that I worked with him, and a little like, gee, I wish I'd known him less well. You get too close to certain people. Same with Jerry Lewis. When he came in, and he was kind of a problem.
Yeah.
And I
remember when he came into my dressing room, Mark, I'll never forget this. I'm sitting there with several people, and he came in, he said, now look, I'm Jerry Lewis, and if I wanted to, I could take over the show, but I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. This is your show, kid, and you do the thing you're going to do. Jeff Altman. Well, as you know, he took over the show.
Yeah, oh yeah. I mean, it was impossible. And then he was demanding full credit as a writer on the show afterwards. I refused to let him have it.
Good for you.
Said I would not allow it. But we were so desperate for guest stars that we were like begging people. Nobody wanted to do the show, even before we were on the air. Nobody wanted to do the show.
Well, that was because of my presence, but
no, it was because. You know what the problem was? We would go to some big star a lot, and they'd say, why the hell do these two girls from Japan have a show and I don't? I'm not doing their show. I should star in the show.
Yep.
And we got that from several big guests. And the other problem we had was that they were doing this thing called The Big Show down at the Sunset Gower Studios, and they had holds on all the people we wanted. We'd call someone, and we'd say, because they had this contract that said if you did The Big Show, which paid a lot better than we did, you couldn't be on another show for 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after. So we didn't have
time.
No, anyway. So we had all these problems getting guests, and literally we had to build the sets before we had the guests. I don't know if you know this. Jeremy, our set designer, would come to me and he'd say, what sets do you want for show 3? And I said, we're doing show 1. He said, yeah, but I got to start building the sets for show 3 now, or they're going to cost us a fortune if I have to do them at the last minute. Mm-hmm. So I'd say, well, build this and this. And then we'd write the sketches to fit the sets and the guests we got. And there was one time we had Buddy Ebsen for about he backed out. But we had Buddy Ebsen doing the show. So we wrote a sketch for a roast of Abraham Lincoln. We thought Buddy Ebsen would play Lincoln. And
I remember the sketch very well. Mark.
Well, okay. So we wrote this sketch, and we really liked the sketch. It was one of the things we were proudest of, I think, of the writing staff. And then they came in and said, we haven't got Buddy Ebsen. And at that point, it was, we think we're going to get Diane Carroll. Can she do the same sketch, whatever you wrote? And we said, I don't think Diane Carroll can play Lincoln. I don't know. It's just not, might be out of her range. So we junked the sketch. And then Marty comes in and says, we don't have Diane Carroll. We have Red Buttons. And I go, because I told them to build a roast set. And I go, perfect. We got lucky. And we put Jim Varney in the Lincoln suit, and we put um, red buttons as Lee who the part we were going to have you play. We were going to have you play. I just almost said Lee Harvey Oswald, John Wilkes Booth, and so you did Georgie Jessel as the roast master.
Well, I did.
Yes, you were the host of it. Yes.
Welcome to the show.
That's right. And that was the sketch that I wound up being in.
Yep.
I was in that sketch.
I think that was the only sketch you did.
I was the only, and it was the only one I ever will do. I was in there by accident. I had set a rule on that show that the writers couldn't be in the sketches because Biff Maynard was writing himself into everything.
I'm sure
Biff Maynard was determined to to replace you and the girls and make it the Biff Maynard hour. And so I just said, no writers in sketches. We had Varney, who was wonderful. Jim Varney was so damn funny, and he, he's a guy who just hadn't found his niche yet in the business.
Well,
he later became
until he did, you know what I mean.
Yeah. And we had Sherry. Then Eichen, Sherry Steinkeller, who I did an interview with, and we had Anna Mathias, and really funny people. And
Anna Mathias,
Anna. And so, so finally, when we did this roast sketch, the writers all came to me, and I was the head writer, and they said, "Please let us be the extras in it. Please let us be the extras in it. Please, we promise we won't spend all day on the set. We'll work on the script." We'll just write the script. We'll work the script, and we won't spend all day in rehearsals and on the set. I go, okay, fine. And I meant when I said the writers can be on the extras, I didn't realize that included me. So the next thing I know, they got me a costume. They'd figured out my sizes because Madeline, the costume designer, had ordered me a tuxedo. She had my sizes because. Remember those tuxedos you were wearing?
Sure.
She got me one of those. I needed a tuxedo, so she got me a tuxedo, and for cost.
I got very possessive of that outfit,
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely.
Remember the time it was you, me, and Bonnie Dorr, and I said Donny Osmond cannot wear a tuxedo. Do you remember this?
Yes. I think I do. Go ahead.
And Bonnie screamed at me. She said, "You can't talk to me that way," and we ended up wearing the tux.
Well. Those were tuxes that if you went into a store retail to buy them, they were like $1,200.
Yeah.
And Madeline was getting them for $145. so I had to buy me a tuxedo. Anyway, so we're doing this sketch, and I'm on the stage. I go, I shouldn't be here. I don't belong on a stage. Actor. There was a moment in your life, Jeff, when you were in front of an audience and you felt comfortable and you said, "Hey, I can do this. I belong here in front of audiences." Remember that moment?
Sixth grade.
Sixth grade. Tell us about that moment. I'll get back to that story.
Well, in sixth grade, I remember there was a Christmas tree up in the room, and no one was to go near the tree because it had been decorated by this witch of a sixth grade teacher, and she said, no one go near the tree. Please, no one go near the tree. So as I was putting on my coat once, I put my coat on and at the same time knocked the entire tree over. And instead of going, "Oh, I'm sorry," I went, "It's down. It's down. I know it's down." And the class tried not to laugh, but they were all laughing. And sure enough, that Christmas tree took a dive.
That's wonderful. Well, I just didn't want to ever do that. I was the only guy at the store when I was hanging around there who didn't have a stand-up act.
That's right.
Some of the comedians treated me like, "What are you doing here?"
Everyone who knew you loved you, Mark.
No. So, well, if that's debatable, but even then, there were guys who didn't know who I was, or didn't know me, and we'd be like, a bunch of us would say, I'm hanging out with different comics, and they'd say, "Let's go down to Carney's, the train down the street, to get a burger tonight," and somebody would say, "I don't think he should come with us. He's not a stand-up comedian. This is for comics only."
Really?
And yeah. And Yeah, it's like I wasn't part of the brotherhood. I hadn't passed the initiation. So but anyway, so I didn't want to ever do um, on camera stuff. I didn't want to be part. Remember, you had an idea for a sketch you wanted me in that I refused to do. You had this idea about us going about when we had Hefner on. You wanted to do a sketch where we can get into the Playboy Mansion and you can't. Do you remember that idea you had?
Yeah,
You wanted like somebody is keeping you out, and we walk by. Oh, hi, I'm Mark Evanier. I'm the head writer on the Pink Lady Show. Oh yeah, you go right on in. We can't let the actors in though.
well,
Anyway,
I
yeah.
had always wanted to go up there. I had always wanted to see the mansion, and finally, I got to once. I performed up there actually, Mark. Once I did a little bit of stand up.
Really, I got invited on the guest list. Hef liked me, and we bonded talking about cartoonists because he was a former cartoonist, and I got on the guest list for a while, and I went to the mansion a couple of times, and then I got myself banned. I got myself kicked out of the mansion. I got taken off the list. It wasn't banned. They just said I was off the invite list. I'll tell you that story when we're off the air.
Okay.
It's anyway, but I was taking up. Remember my friend Bridget, one of the dancers on the show. Bridget, sure. I used to take Bridget up there for the parties and things like that, and she figures into the story, but I'll tell it to you another time.
Okay.
So anyway, so we're on the stage doing this Abraham Lincoln roast, and I'm sitting there feeling like I don't belong here. I should be in the booth looking at this on the monitor. And I'm thinking, this is so wrong. And then I thought, now wait a minute, how does this sketch end? I had forgotten how the sketch ended. I realized it ended with us all getting up and dancing to a song that I wrote. I went, wait a minute, I have to dance at the end? I am the worst dancer in the world. You think you're a bad dancer. I am terrible.
Was this on the radio?
No, this was the end of the Lincoln sketch.
Oh, what am I talking
about? The end of the Lincoln sketch, yeah. Well, we had a song. The Cross would let us do anything we wanted in a sketch as long as it ended with a song. That was all they cared about is dropping balloons at the end of every sketch. So I actually had to get up and dance in what was certainly not the Peacock's proudest moment in NBC history.
No,
it was there was nothing on that show that was funnier than me trying to dance. It was awful. It was just, but
yeah, I remember when Letterman was on Mary Tyler Moore. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Show? And Michael Keaton and Letterman were on the show. And at one point, Letterman was asked to dance, and that didn't go well.
Yeah. Now you met Letterman at the store, right?
I met Dave in 1975, late in 75.
And then you guys were on the Starland Vocal Band
in 77.
77. And it was
summer replacement show.
Yes. Well, I hate these questions. Like, what was that like? But what was that like?
It was some of the most fun Dave and I ever had. I mean, we went to Washington. They flew us to Washington from LA, where we were both living, and we hung out with the band a little bit. But we got to hang out with Mark Russell. Remember him?
Mark Russell. Yeah,
Mark Russell and guys from the Firesign Theater, and. But mostly it was just Dave and I. And I remember one thing that happened. We were staying at the Shoreham Hotel in Washington, and my friend, who's no longer alive, who was a very, very close friend of mine, came down there with his girlfriend. This is 1977, and I said, "Look, we're going to play a trick on this guy who you don't know." It was David Letterman at the time before he was famous, and I said, "I want you to go down there, knock on the door, and pretend that you had just been given his room." So they went over to the door, and the door happened to be, for some reason, cracked. It was open, and they walked in and said, "Well, gee, this is very nice and stuff." And you heard some mumbling from the bathroom. It was Dave shaving, and they said, well, this is our room. I don't know what's going on." He goes, "Take it, just take it."
What was the story? Tell me the story about you and Dave at the Indianapolis 500 when this woman asked you to take her picture.
We were at the Indy 500 on the racetrack, minutes before the race actually started. We were on the track, And a woman ran up to us. We were talking to, I don't know if it was by then, if Letterman had a team yet or not. You know, he has an Indy racing team that he owned with Bobby Rahal. And so this woman came over and said, Dave, do you mind if I take a picture of you? He said, I don't mind if you don't mind. And she said, here. I took the camera and ran as fast as I could down the 2.5-mile track. And Dave always got a big kick out of that.
Well, didn't somebody catch you and bring you back or something like that?
No,
Or
I turned around and that was the end of the joke.
I think someone embellished the story by telling sometime that you got the security guards grabbed you, brought you back, and you said, "Oh, I'm Dave Letterman's friend. I'm with him. I'm playing a joke on him." And they brought you back to him and said, "Mr. Letterman, this guy says he's with you." And Dave said, "Never saw him before in my life." That's the way someone told me the story.
A little embellished.
Yeah. Okay. Good. We did a thing for Letterman. Remember those things we did for the NASA sketches, the blackouts about NASA?
Yep.
Remember that?
Yep.
Only one of them ever aired.
It aired was that the one where the guy was in a chiropractor's office?
No. We went out to they gave you some money to do some little blackouts, and it was going to be things where you were a test boy at NASA. And you called me up and you said, I want to do a bunch of blackouts, and we wanted to, you had a studio out in the valley somewhere. And we went out there and we did about 8 of them. And you ran 3 of them on Letterman one night. And I think the space shuttle exploded after that. So they didn't run the rest of them.
Oh, yeah,
but
right.
It was little blackouts. One of them was you were in a helmet pressure test, a big black guy. We put you on a little stool, and this big black guy comes in and puts you on a headlock, and you passed out he was testing your pressure. Another one was that we put you on the Chuck Yeager throat panel, and I got my girlfriend to come out and put on a bikini, and I was holding you back on this leash while you were lunging at her.
I remember this.
And then the last one was me checking you for REMs, and I walked in a lab coat, and I opened your eyes, and you did all these weird eye looks. And yeah, that's right. And you ran them on Letterman one night. And people were calling me saying, Mark, I was watching David Letterman last night. There was a guy who looked a lot like you in a bit there.
Wasn't the one that got on the one with your girlfriend where you were holding me on a leash?
That's right. Yeah, well, there were 3 of them. You ran 3 of them. I think we did like 12 of them, and you were going to run 3 every time you were on. Yeah. So you ran those 3, and then I think the space shuttle accident happened after that or something like that. They just never ran the other ones.
That was 86. That was the old
I have them someplace on an old Betacam 8 tape here somewhere. I don't know where they are, but
you should melt those down and send me them.
Yes, but no, that was a strange moment. They're on YouTube. The bit's on YouTube someplace.
Probably.
But it's the thing I was going to get to, Jeff, is I always looked at you as a natural comedian. There's guys at the store, and some of them were very successful, who were guys who just thought, I could probably make some money as a comedian, and they learned how to do it. It wasn't in their DNA, but they learned they bought jokes, they learned how to deliver them and such. And then there's guys who are just naturally funny. I have this whole theory in the comic book business about organic and non-organic artists, guys who learn how to draw.
Right, versus people who are born with it.
Right. And there's comics, and there's guys at the store I would see who I thought, I look at them, you can look at Ron Williams and you say, how could that guy be anything but a comedian?
Right.
That guy was going to be a comedian no matter what. Absolutely. And there are guys who were, looked like they could have been selling insurance if they never got, and especially if you saw open mic night, you'd see all these guys who just weren't naturally funny. They thought they could figure out how to do it.
You know what just occurred to me, Mark? What just occurred, that a lot of the people that we've mentioned tonight, I would say maybe 75 to 80% of the people we've talked about tonight are dead, aren't with us anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, from Biff Maynard to Jerry Lewis to
Sid Caesar.
Caesar,
Art Fisher.
Art
Art
Fisher,
Fisher died. Yeah, we went through. Yeah, and we're still here. Um,
and the show died.
and the show died. Yeah, well, if you know the funny thing is there never could have been more than 6 episodes of that show because those girls were booked forever. And do you remember how miserable they were?
Oh, they were just crying every day. They were in their dressing rooms just bawling, It was
Yeah,
awful.
they hated doing it. And I kept writing them out of sketches because they were flying back and forth to Japan.
They were?
Yes, they were booked in Japan all the time that they were doing our show. On Friday night when we finished taping, they would be taken right to the airport and get on a plane, and the next night they were on in front of a stadium in Japan.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
The amount of fans they. I mean, they were like the Beatles in Japan.
Yeah, for a brief period there. And they were a manufactured group like the Monkees. Somebody hired them to play those roles. And they
Really?
didn't. Yeah, and they hated being in the United States. They hated the fact that they had to go out with so little rehearsal. They hated our choreographer. They hated the fact that the network was insisting that they dance separately. They not do everything in unison, which was their act in Japan. And a couple of times, Me would come to me. Me was the girls were named Me and Kay.
Yeah.
And Me would come to me and she'd go, "Oh, I'm sorry, we can't do a better job for you. We're just so tired. We just can't. I feel like we're failing you." And I go, "No, you're not failing. We're failing you."
Yeah.
And the other girl, Kay, her boyfriend left her because he didn't want her in America all the time, and she was miserable about that.
Remember.
And they were so happy at the wrap party. They were the only time they were ever happy was at that wrap party.
Mark,
And,
do you have the pen? Remember, I gave everyone a gold-plated pen, I think.
yes, yeah.
Do you have your
Yes,
pen?
I have my pen. Yeah, I know where it is. It's not here right now, but I've got it.
Okay.
Yes. Jeff, you were wonderful in the role of star of the show. The girls, had better billing, which we fought remember how much we fought to get your name in the title of the show?
Do I remember?
Jesus, yeah.
I spent an evening with Paul
Drew.
Paul Drew. I spent an evening at his house trying to say, listen, the show, I'm half the show. Shouldn't it be Pink Lady and Jeff? And technically the name of the show was Pink Lady.
Yeah.
But it appeared everywhere as Pink Lady and Jeff, thank goodness.
That was the compromise, finally.
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean we had God, I don't know if Paul Drew is still alive, but he was. I did not get along with Mr. Drew. I didn't get along with a lot of those people.
Yeah.
But he took me aside a bunch of times and said, "This show is going to be a huge hit, and we'll get rid of the Crofts, and we'll get rid of Jeff, and I'll produce the show, and you'll be the executive producer, and you be the producer, Mark." And I went, "Yeah, that's going to happen, right? Sure, yeah." That he was anyway.
Silverman was still alive.
No, but
and he's gone too.
Yeah, he's gone. Yeah, well, no, it's but the thing was that since the girls couldn't be the anchor star, it fell to you, and you kept the spirit up on the set. I remember the day that we wrapped the show, the last tape date. You gave this wonderful speech to the crew and thanking them all. It was just it was impressive. It was very, very good. And I thought, gee, this is you were the joy of doing that show, Jeff. I mean, I thought you were so good at what you did, always. And I also thought this guy got sabotaged a lot.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Mark,
did you write the on the radio thing? Was that you?
I wrote all the lyrics on the show. Yeah, I wrote all this, and I wrote the Cheap Shot magazine song.
That was great too.
Words and music. Do you know how that song came to be?
No.
I'll tell you this. I'm talking more than I want to on this. I wanted you to talk more, but let me tell you. We had this guy named Matthew. Oh, he was. I don't want to get his name wrong. It's Matthew something. He was our musical director, and he was way understaffed, and we were giving him stuff at the last minute. He was working harder than anybody. He was up all night, and we needed a song. We had this idea. Art Fisher came in and said, "You must do a segment." Art Fisher had directed the Sonny and Cher show and the Donnie and Marie show, and he was basically forcing us all the time to imitate segments on that. They had a segment on the Sonny and Cher show called Headlines in the Paper. And Art wanted us to do that. He wanted us to do headlines in the paper, and he wanted us to call it Headlines in the Paper and steal their song and everything. So we finally changed it to this thing called Cheap Shot Magazine.
Yep, I'm
we
sure.
kind of forced this, which was like a National Enquirer thing.
Yeah.
So we needed a song to wrap around the segment, singing about Cheap Shot Magazine. So I wrote the lyrics, and I'd never written music in my life. And but I'd written lyrics, and I wrote the lyrics and gave them to Matthew. And days are passing, and he's busy with other stuff. He wasn't goofing off. He was working his ass off on the stuff that, you know, had priority and like that, and doing arrangements and all the music. And finally, we came down to the next morning. We had to record the song, and it's 5:00 p.m. And he calls me up and he says, "I don't have time to write the music for your lyrics." And I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" He said, "You're going to write the music." And I said, "I can't write music. I don't play anything." He said, "Did you have a tune in your head when you wrote these lyrics?" I said, "Kind of." He said, "Okay, get a tape recorder and sing the song into the tape cassette. And I will have my arranger pick it up from you in 20 minutes. And we're going to go with that." I said, "That's crazy. That can't possibly work." He said, "It's the only way. There's no way I can get the song written tonight. We've got to record it at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning." So I get a tape cassette and I sing with my rotten voice.
Remember how it went?
Yeah, I went, "There's a mag at your supermart made for folks who are not too smart. It's a gossip rag like you've never seen. Get the scoop, all the poop, Cheap Shot Magazine. Line a cage with a page, Cheap Shot Magazine." And we had different lyrics all the time to it.
Yeah.
But I wrote these things and I sang it into the tape recorder. It sounded no better than that. And the guy comes 20 minutes later, a messenger comes and takes the cassette away. And I go, "This is never going to work." The next morning, I walk into this recording studio we were working on down on Sunset. It's not there anymore. And I walk in, and before I'm even in the studio, I hear from inside an 18-piece orchestra playing "Ya da 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 da." They're playing this song, and it sounded like a real song. And there's singers, there's professional singers there. You know who Tom Scott is?
Yes, the saxophone.
Tom Scott is playing the saxophone on this song.
I knew Tom.
Yeah, he was the studio musician. He was a session guy that when he was available, we used him on a couple of things I did. I'm thinking, Tom Scott is playing a song that I sang into a tape recorder last night, and we used that song a couple times.
Yeah.
And then I rewrote it for the rap party. Remember, at the rap party we did it there.
I don't remember it at the rap party.
Oh, I turned it into Cheap Shit TV show. It went. Fred's idea has gone down the drain. It's the Japanese super train. Dukes of Hazzard now has a Dukes of Hazzard. Cher is a big 4-0. You know who won't renew? Cheap Shit TV show. Yeah. And we did this rap party thing. I was wearing my tuxedo because I was playing you. We did a rap party where the writers played everybody on the show. Lauren Froman played Art Fisher, and I played you, and Biff Maynard and Jim Brochu. I also interviewed Jim on this show already, played Pink Lady, and they were wearing their kimonos, and we went out and did a parody of the whole show, insulting everybody, and everyone was saying we should have put the rap party on TV and dumped the show. But now you've been friends. Letterman has you on. Well, he doesn't have you on now, but he had you on all the time on his show. He loved you. You could tell how much he liked you all the time.
Very close friends.
And would you guys when they flew you back to New York to do his show, would you guys go out to dinner after the show and hang out and do stuff?
Sometimes we would. Sometimes he was too busy. I had dinner with him right before I caught the dreaded COVID-19.
Yeah, you want to talk a little bit about that? Because
I was in New York with my wife in very early March, and Bonnie, my wife, attended 3 different functions, 2 shows, and went to Carnegie Hall to see something. And in the process of doing that, caught the virus. So by the time we got home, we were starting to sniffle and not feel good. And she got not real sick, but sick, and I got terrible cramps on the lower part of my body, probably from overuse. But she She was had a cough for about a month, and I was laid up for about 2 weeks. But we both are very healthy now, thank God.
Yeah.
But I had dinner with Dave. That's the last time I saw Dave was in March when we had dinner together. A couple nights before we probably caught the thing.
Now,
See, my daughter lives in New York, and that was the main reason I went there to see her.
It struck me whenever you were on with Dave, he tried to get you to do his favorite bits. He'd be asking you to do a little Carson and asking you to do a little Nixon, things like that. It looks like sometimes you weren't that thrilled to be doing old material again or something,
No.
but he wanted to hear it.
Right.
And it also struck me when I was watching is that you were the kind of the opposite of Dave in that, you could do all these things he couldn't do. Dave couldn't do a character. Dave couldn't do impressions. Dave couldn't do physical comedy. I mean, David Letterman is brilliant at what he does, but it's like he envied you for all the skill set you had that he didn't have. I don't want to dwell on this a lot, but it always, when we were talking about to the network about Pink Lady, at one point I said something in one of the meetings. I said, here's what it is. All we know these girls can do, because we hadn't even met them yet. We had no idea what they could do. All we know they can do is sing and dance. And all I know about Jeff Altman is he can do anything except sing and dance. Between these three people, we might have one variety star. Because I said, Jeff can play the drums, Jeff can do magic. I knew all this stuff about you. And Jeff can do characters, and Jeff does impressions, and Jeff does physical stuff. And he's got a huge wide range. And these girls can do the two things he can't do, sing and dance. And that was and the people in the network, oh, that's a brilliant observation. I don't know where it got us, but it made them feel like, gave them a little confidence in the show. But Dave, is a guy who just doesn't do any of that stuff. He proved that on the Mary Tyler Moore variety show.
Well, let me say in deference to my old friend that I think if you really, really think about it, I think he was the most influential comic of my time. I think he influenced television. And in fact, I think when you were watching Pink Lady, it was the end of that type of genre. And it was the beginning of David Letterman.
Yeah, that's probably true.
So as I say, I think he was the most influential of all the comics that's there.
He's the guy who reinvented the talk show for a new era.
That's
everybody.
Right.
Everybody's done a talk show since him has been trying to do, either early Dave or late Dave. Colbert's trying to do late Dave. Conan was trying to do early Dave. But they're still trying to do Dave. Yeah, and right. And he was a guy who just was hypnotic to watch. You couldn't. I mean, you didn't care who he had on. You watched for him.
Absolutely. You never knew what was going to happen.
Yeah, I was backstage one time when I saw David. I got to see David Letterman screaming at Donald Trump once, backstage. Yeah.
No kidding.
Yeah, but and Donald. This has been back at NBC, and Donald Trump was just as nice and polite as he is today. But Dave was, he was an amazing guy, and I hope he still does stuff.
Listen, what's the matter with Donald Trump? I mean, I've been taking my Clorox every day, and I feel great.
Yeah, it didn't help you much on the COVID stuff.
No.
Jeff, we got some. Let's get to the chat room. We got some questions here from people who have sent in here. I'm going to go to read a couple of them here. Somebody, one of the first. Remember, I told you one of the first comments somebody would say is they'd ask you about butt steaks. Well, we didn't get that, but we got somebody who wrote, "I will cream you like mushroom soup." Here's somebody who wants to know about when Jeff played Boss Hogg's nephew on Dukes of Hazzard.
Yeah,
that's right. How many of those did you do?
Well, every season they wrote an episode around the character I played, which was Huey Hogg. And I got to play with a lot of the show was kind of cartoonish, obviously. But the actors that were on it were superior. Sorrel Book, who played Boss Hogg, was a Yale trained actor. And the guy who played the sheriff, Roscoe P. Coltrane, he was, oh God, what was his name? You got to know this, Mark.
Hold on. I was distracted. I was looking at reading messages. What? Say that again.
The guy that played the sheriff on the Dukes of Hazzard, Roscoe P. Coltrane. He was in westerns for years and years and years. I want to say Jim, but it's not Jim. Gosh, I can't believe I can't remember his name.
Someone in the chat room will tell us. James Best.
James Best is exactly right. What a great actor. What a funny guy.
Thank you, Mr. Plunkett. Somebody who wrote, let me go back here a bit here. Oh, and listen, you were on, I got you a job on Baywatch.
Yes, you did.
Remember that?
and that worked out, Mark. I did like 6 or 7 episodes of that show.
Yeah. Do you know how that came about?
No.
A friend of mine was producing, Ernie Wallengren, the late Ernie Wallengren, lovely guy. He calls me up and he says, we have this character and he's got to be a nerd, kind of a nerdish, like a Jerry Lewis nerd. But at some point in the show, he's got to take his shirt off and have a good muscular physique. And the guy we booked doesn't have that. And we want to replace him. Can you think of a guy who can play a weak, sniveling little, I think he even described it as an Eddie Deason part, but who has got a good physique? And I said, Jeff Altman. So he said, really, you think you do? Yeah, I've seen Jeff with his shirt off. He's got a good physique. So they called your agent. I gave him your agent's name. They called you in, and they called me up, and they said, we want to book him tomorrow to shoot on this show. The problem is he's got a job tomorrow. And I said, well, can you get him out of it? They said, well, it's with you. You booked him to do a Garfield show tomorrow. So I said, okay, well, tell Jeff he can either do my show for less money, or he can do your show and hang out with the girls on the beach. and we replaced you on the Garfield show, and you did a couple of them. Then remember what happened on the last day of shooting when you came over to my house? You called me up. You called me from the set, and you said, "Are you home?" And I go, "Yeah." He said, "Can I come over?" I go, "Sure." He said, "We just wrapped shooting." So you came over, and I thought, "Oh, he's going to bring me a gift or something like that. He's going to bring me an autographed picture of Pamela Anderson or something like that, whoever it was." And you didn't bring me a gift. What you wanted to go to my Playboy collection and look up all the girls you just worked with.
Well, you had it, man. You got every Playboy that was ever published.
Half gave me a lifetime subscription, and I already had a bunch of them because I also have every kind of comic book ever written too.
Really?
Yeah. Anyway, no, not everyone. But at one point I came close. Let's see. Let's see. Let me get some of the questions here. The great Jim Varney had some great moments on Pink Lady. Yes, he did. God, he was funny. He was so good.
A lot of people don't realize, Mark, what a fantastic stand-up he was. He was a stand-up comic who had some characters that were absolutely just outstanding, just marked by their individuality and technique. And one of the characters was this character he used to call Mistake. That was the guy's name. And he used to talk like this, and he had his hand over his chest, and he'd say, "Mom, is there anybody home? Make some fudge. Is Zorro on?"
Letterman used to quote him all the time.
Yeah, and every 15 seconds or so, he'd say, "What time is it?"
Yeah. It's amazing. He got out of the business after a few years after we did the show, and then he got this Hey Vern gig back home in wherever he was from, and that got him back to Hollywood. It was so big.
And then he made movies.
He was. Okay, here's some obscurities from your career, Jeff. Trumbull comic once. I'd love to hear if Jeff has any memories of playing the Weather Wizard on the infamous Legends of the Superhero specials with Adam West and Burt Ward in the 70s.
Oh, I sure do remember that. I remember meeting Adam West especially, and we did a scene where I was disguised. I was supposedly playing one of these superheroes called the Weather Wizard.
Yeah,
he had decided to do a show about all the superheroes, and I had never even heard of the Weather Wizard, but that was me.
I could have shown you the issues here. Yes, I have them all.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
And I had a wonderful scene with Adam West, and it was great. I was selling him a used car or something.
Yeah, and Howie Morris was in those, and a lot of interesting people. Yeah. Then Chuck Cigars says, just a shout out for the Washington Hillbillies, which I mailed the only copy of, except for mine. I really enjoyed it at the time, as I recall. That was a record you did. Tried to do the first family with Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, and the guy who wrote the First Family album, whose name I know you know the guy. Can you remember people who were invested in that project, the First Family?
Earl Dowd or Bob Booker?
It was Bob Booker.
George Foster.
You're unbelievable.
Yeah. Well,
and
what else am I going to do with this information? Yeah, and Jenna Len.
I played Jimmy Carter. Yeah. I was Jimmy Carter, and I talked like this the whole time. Hello, my name is Jimmy Carter. It's very important to point out that my brother is full of gas.
Jenna Len says, those Letterman appearances back in the day, so great. I'll flip you like a cheese omelet. Still gets plenty of play on my iTunes comedy playlist. Thank you, Jeff, for years of laughs. # Leonard Moon.
Oh.
Is Leonard? Do you ever do Leonard anymore? Did you put him to sleep a long time ago?
I put him in a chokehold. He's sleeping.
I used to tell people that was an example. I taught comedy at UCLA. USC for a couple of years.
Oh yeah.
And I would show them clips of different things. And I would say, you had when you introduce yourself as Leonard, you'd say, "My name is Leonard Moon, and I don't have the brains of a ice cube." And I said, "Look at that." He says, "A ice cube." There's an example of how one letter completely changes the color and the flavor of the joke, because the guy would use the wrong A and N back and forth.
Well, Leonard Moon was a prize fighter who had just taken too many hoofs to the head, and he was one of those guys that Muhammad Ali had dispatched early in his career, and he had really had his brains knocked out, and he even would do the joke, "How do I spell relief? I don't know."
Yeah. Yeah, no, but it was like more drawn out. You're rushing the joke. I mean, it's like, how do I spell relief?
I don't know.
That's it. It's the timing. Damondo asked, your thoughts on the Pink Lady spoof on Saturday Night Live, which featured Lorraine Newman with Gilda Radner.
They called it Pink Lady and Carl, didn't they?
They had you playing Carl Sagan. It was Carl Sagan took your spot.
I was replaced by Carl Sagan.
Paul Schaefer played him. The Pink Lady girls hated that. They thought that was NBC ridiculing them in public for doing a bad job with the TV show they were on.
Really? They understood kind of what was going on?
They knew that NBC had done a rip on them. That an NBC show had done a rip on them. Anyway.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Jim De Lorenzo says, Jeff, I always remember a bit you did about Raymond Burr as Perry Mason defending Marlon Brando in Philadelphia. I think I was the only one in the room that got the bit.
Hello, my name is Raymond Burr, the world's largest living mammal. When I began my career playing the role of Perry Mason, I was fast becoming this country's favorite legal rib roast. My weight began to increase. I gradually needed the aid of a wheelchair to cart my ass from town to town. I'm now proud to say that I weigh more than most two-bedroom homes. I still remember that bit. I don't know why. That bit is 45 years old.
That was a great bit. Some unknown named Bill Kirkenbauer says, talk about me more.
Bill, we love you, brother.
Yeah. Bill is one of the funniest guys I ever came across. There's another natural comedian. We were talking about guys who are just naturally funny. Bill is just funny. You did a thing for me once. You did a favor for me. You came and spoke at my cartoon. You performed at a dinner our cartoonist group had, and Bill did it too. And both of you took the opportunity to not do prepared material, to just kind of ad lib on stage. Right. And you were both hysterical. Bill just has this wonderful instinct, and he just I just like watching him move. It's another guy. I like comedians who move, who are physical.
Well, how do you explain to somebody that, if they ask you what's Bill's act, you say, well, he does a garbage truck. And how could that be funny, you think? But man, to watch him do this thing with the guys in the morning and movements, and he was great. He's
how could it be funny for a guy to get there and ask people if they see anything in his nose? I mean, you were doing. My friend Stu Showstack asks Jeff if he remembers helping Norman Lear test out the refurbished studios when he moved his shows to Metro Media. He and Steve Bluestein were hired to make audiences laugh to test the mics.
How?
Second part, it was murder trying to get people to come without lying to them. Did Lear promise Jeff either parts on their shows or warm-up jobs? None of it materialized. That's
No.
a friend of mine named Stu who used to do warm-ups over there. He's a TV historian, and he was a warm-up guy on a lot of shows.
I'll never forget that, Mark. I remember Mitzi Shore, who owned the Comedy Store, saying, well, I'm going to pick Steve Bluestein and Jeff Altman because they're tumblers. They like the tumul. That's, I think, a Yiddish expression for being kind of a guy that kind of can get all over the stage and, sort of Jerry Lewis the place up a little bit. And that was me. But Bluestein was just a stand-up. He just did straight monologue stuff. But he could sing too. I wonder where Steve Bluestein is. I'd love to know that. Anyway,
I don't know.
I remember that vividly.
He's probably somewhere with Ed Bluestone. I mean, or whatever. Did you get along with Mitzi?
Yes, I did. I think there was a time when Mitzi, I was kind of one of her favorites for a time, and then that kind of towards the end of her life, we kind of drifted apart, not because of any reason, just because we didn't get to see each other as much. And but she was responsible for putting us all on stage the very first time. Myself, Letterman, and lots of other people. So she deserves some credit.
Did she ask too much of you in return? I guess that's the.
Well, that all came to kind of fruition with the strike at the Comedy Store in '78 and in '79. I guess I don't remember the year exactly, but. Then she felt horribly dismayed and upset, and she felt there had been some kind of revolution. And really, it had been kind of a revolution, because for the first time in comedy clubs, comedians were asking to get paid something. And she steadfastly said, I'm not paying anybody. And I stood up in one of the meetings and said, well, Mitzi, would you pay us $5 cab fare to come out to the store? She said, no, this is a showcase. And it really had become not a showcase. People were doing their best stuff for the audiences, and it was time that we got paid. And by and large, it was kind of Tom Dreesen, Elaine Boozler, and Jay Leno, all of them, and myself included, helped push this thing forward. And in fact, I remember Mitzi driving into the club one night. We were on the picket line, and I was walking with Dave, and she was very, very disappointed to see Letterman picketing.
Yeah. And remember who the leader of the Scabs was?
The leader of the Argus Hamilton?
No, Biff Maynard.
Is that right?
Yes.
Wow, that's right.
Biff was the guy who led the charge to break the strike. He was the guy who allegedly ran over Leto.
That's right.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. But no.
Did he torch the Improv?
Pardon? What?
Did he torch the Improv?
Well, that's the legend. This is strange. There's this book out called "Hey, I'm Dying Up Here" by Bill Nodlisser about the Comedy Store strike.
Right.
It's mostly about that. It's mostly about Steve Lubetkin and Dreesen. It's kind of, I think, it feels like Dreesen dictated half the book. Which who else? I mean, he was in the middle of all that.
Yeah.
And the story is that somebody torched the Improv. It had somebody threw a Molotov cocktail in the back alley and burned out 2/3 of the building to put them out of business. Almost. They damn near succeeded. And in the book accuses two comedians, Biff Maynard and Ollie Joe Prater, of doing it.
Oh my God.
It basically kind of, it doesn't say they did it. It says everybody knew they'd done it. And I thought to myself, now at that point, Ollie Joe Prater was dead, but when that book came out, Biff Maynard was alive.
Yeah.
And I read it. I thought to myself, lawyers read books. This is a Simon & Schuster book. The lawyers at Simon & Schuster would not let this go through unless there was some foundation for it, because they're leaving themselves open to a lawsuit. So a couple of years later, I asked Bud Friedman, owner of the Improv, about
Right.
this, and he said that on his, now this is, I'm quoting him, he said that on his deathbed, Ollie Joe Prater admitted that he had torched the Improv. He and his friends had done it. And I said, did he
Oh,
implicate Biff Maynard? And he said, I don't think so. He didn't say who the friends were who did it, but they were close.
Incidentally, Mark, this is the most publicity Biff Maynard has ever gotten.
Yes. Yeah. No, I don't know if I told you this story. I think on the phone I told you this story that you didn't know. We had this lady who typed scripts for us, named Yana. She was this older woman. We had this, we had PAs and people in the office, and there was this woman who was just so polite. She was like a school teacher, very nice and dignified, older lady, and she typed scripts, and she was so nice. And she was like, well, at one point I got really fed up with Biff. We were having problems. I fired him at one point finally, but this is before that. And I got all mad at him. And in front of Yana, said, Mark, what's wrong? She came to my office. She said, what's wrong? I go, oh, I'm so fed up with Biff Maynard, that asshole. And then I realized you don't say asshole in front of this lady. She was like 70 and polite. Yeah. And I said, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to use that term. And she said, oh no, I understand you comedy writers, you use language like that. And then she said to me, but Biff's got his good qualities. And I said, well, name one. And she said, well, he's got a very attractive penis. And I went, what? I didn't believe she'd said it. And she said it and repeated it to me. And I went, what the hell is that? And I thought, oh, she's trying to do one of those, like the jokes that the kind of comedy writers would do, saying naughty words for shock effect or something like that. I had no idea. So like 3 years later, I found out what it was. Tell them.
I believe Biff actually wrote some jokes for me 40 years ago. And he helped remember the Marlon Perkins piece we used to do?
Yes.
He helped me write, and for my stand-up act, some of that material. Yeah. Anyway, he was in Playgirl.
That's right. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Out in Playgirl.
Yeah,
that was a big deal around the Comedy Store. Hey, how'd you get that, man?
Yeah, well, they were apparently the girls in the office were passing it around the office.
Oh,
that's how she'd seen it anyway.
Oh my God.
I never figured that out. Ask Jeff about doing a card trick for Carson.
I was backstage. I was on a show at the time called Nurses on NBC, and Johnny was just doing his job, and every night doing the show. And we were at the affiliates convention in Radio City Music Hall. And this is 1991, and I'm standing backstage, and I've got sneakers on and a pair of pants and a shirt. And Johnny, I kind of standing there, he looks over and goes, hey, Jeff, are those the only shoes you got? And I said, yeah, Johnny, I'm sorry. And so I had somebody run out and get me a deck of cards. And then I kind of slid up next to Johnny and did a card move. And Johnny said, hey, that's wild. Let me take you backstage and show you what I do. And so we went backstage, and Johnny put on a little magic show for me. And it was just unbelievable. That for me was one of the best moments I had in show business. And then he walked out on stage 15 minutes later and announced his retirement.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, that
was he that good? Was he that good a comedian? I mean, magician rather.
Yes, he was. He knew a fair amount about cards. Yes.
Yeah, I had a friend who was on his show doing magic a couple of times, and I'm just suddenly blanking on the guy's name. He just passed away a couple of years ago.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah. You were getting old, Mark. We're 68.
Yeah. I usually come up with names, but
absolutely.
Yeah.
I know who you're talking. He was from Buffalo. He was on the show several times, wasn't he?
Yeah. And I'm embarrassed. I'm not remembering his name right now. He was
wasn't Mike Skinner.
No, it was. Oh God. God, he did a whole thing for me once at the store. I brought a bunch of network people up, and we had them come in and do stuff. He did stuff for them, and he did this. He was the master of that trick where you flip the cards.
Yeah,
He invented that trick where you flip the cards and people can spot one card. Yeah, peek at one card, and
you can do that for 5 or 6 people.
Yeah. Oh, he was just incredible, and he just died like a year or two ago. I wrote a piece on my blog about him, and I'm just embarrassed. I can't think of his name right now. It'll come to me. But he said that Carson basically had him on so they could do shop talk backstage, and he would do the 10 minutes on the show, and then he'd be backstage for 2 hours with Johnny, showing him moves and teaching him stuff. And Johnny
I think he went to Carson's house several times and actually taught Johnny some stuff.
Yeah. And Brian Gillis. Thank you, Jim DiLorenzo. Brian Gillis. Yes, thank you. Yeah, I should know that. My friend John Plunkett says, thank you, Jeff, for your work in the Blockbuster Video Defensive Driving course. 2-time veteran of the course. You made it really fun. Tell people what he's talking about.
Well, and about 1989 or 88 or something, when Blockbuster Video was just the rage, and everybody was walking in there every night, they made a defensive driving course, and I was the host of the thing, and a lot of people, and instead of going down and taking driving classes, or when you get a ticket, you go to driver's school or whatever it is and they're always comedy.
Traffic school, they call it. Yeah.
Traffic school, of course. Oh, I feel like Jonathan Winters. Okay, yeah. And
Brian Gillis. Okay.
Brian Gillis. And so I narrated. I think that was the most money I ever made, actually, for the least amount of work. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's good. Anyway, my friend Bob Logan, who owes me a phone call. Mark, ask Jeff if there's something up his nose.
Do you see a parakeet or a small amoeba in my nose right now?
Georgie, I can't pronounce your last name, Georgie. I'm sorry. How did he get cast as Jimmy Carter on Maude?
I don't know how some of these people have better memories than even you. Anyway, I don't know. I think we had to audition, and I went in and I had just done the album for the Beverly Hillbillies, or the Washington Hillbillies. And so I had Carter down pretty good. I could do a pretty decent Jimmy Carter, and they called me in Maude to do a voiceover for a phone call. Click. Hello, this is Jimmy Carter. I'd like to say it's very, very important now to point out that, and it went on and on and on, and that was quite a show.
Jeff, do you remember I brought you in once to do a voice on a CBS story break that I wrote, and we had you at a mic sharing a microphone with June Foray, and you didn't know who she was.
Oh my God!
And she did a voice. The minute she did her voice, this big Tugboat Annie voice for you, you turned to her and said, "Wow, have you been doing voices for long?" and she lapsed into Rocky the Flying Squirrel, and you came running over to me saying, "Why didn't you tell me?"
Yeah, I remember that.
Anyway, we're going to wrap this up in a bit, but Bill Kirkenbauer has a request. He says, have him do Carl, the best drunk in the world.
Well, Carl was everybody's uncle. Everybody has an uncle like Carl. They're never drunk, never sober, and they come up to you at Thanksgiving and say, "Look, buddy, I don't need it. I'm 59 years old, and believe me, buddy, I can sink you like a 3-foot putt. I don't need it. I remember you when you were 5 years old, and right now I'll drop you so hard you'll." That was Carl. Everybody's uncle. Everybody has an Uncle Carl.
Anyway, Jeff, I'm going to let you go here because I've kept you long enough here. It's late where you are. Thank you for doing this, Jeff. We got to. Let's talk in the next couple of days. I'll tell you some of the stories I can't tell you on in front of the public.
I'd love to hear them.
I'll tell you about how I got kicked out of the Playboy Mansion. Anyway. But Jeff, I meant everything I've said on this. I admire you tremendously. It was a pleasure having you in my life. It's been. I hope I keep having you. I hope we do something someday together again.
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working on I shouldn't promise anything yet, but I'm working on a new cartoon show now. I don't know what's going to happen with it, but We'll call you about it, maybe.
Maybe.
I don't even know. I hate to promise these things, but I like hiring people I like. I think the way you do a great show is you get people you think are brilliantly talented, and you just get the hell out of their way. You tell them what you need and say, there's your microphone, here's the script, do something. And every time we had you in on, I had you on a couple of shows, you were just perfect. If you had decided to give up on camera and just do voices, you would have the house next door to Welker right now. I mean, it's you're very versatile and you're very creative, and it would have been a waste to not have you on front of a camera, in front of an audience. Are you doing stand up anybody these days? Nobody's doing anything.
I officially retired from the stage last year. I'm no longer doing stand up.
But if somebody called you and offered you the right money, you'd be there. Great. Anyway,
thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Jeff. This has been great. We'll talk in the next couple of days. Good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you soon.